everyone. This is Icebreakers that Engage Your Audience. It's a webinar from ATD Houston. This is May 10th, 2017, and we are very happy to have you. My name is Debbie Richards. I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar. I am the website director for the ATD Houston website, and I'm also a past president of the chapter. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today. Juliana Ashley is an attorney. She's a speaker and a certified coach. She brings over 20 years of experience in law, sales, and television reporting to her career strategy coaching and presentations on powerful and persuasive communication skills. Juliana uses her expertise or experience in the professional world, plus her years as a comedy improvisational performer. That's interesting, to create dynamic and entertaining presentations that are not only fun, but informative and life-changing for our audience. So we're in for a real treat. As a career strategist, Juliana helps professionals make leaps in their careers to find fulfillment, achieve peace of mind, and create extraordinary lives. So we are so fortunate to have Juliana, who's also a member of our ATD chapter, present to us today. So I am going to make Juliana, I'm going to make you the presenter and let you get started. And everyone, as Juliana is talking, she would like for you to engage by posting questions in the question box and also raising your hand. I will be checking those and stopping Juliana throughout the presentation so you can ask your question.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm really excited to be delivering this with you today. I actually think it will be fun and challenging to deliver a webinar on engagement when there's very little engagement that's available through the webinar. So we'll see how much we can keep you all engaged and participating. As Debbie said, feel free to raise your hands, ask your questions throughout. I want you to be a part of this, and I want you to get something out of this for sure. By the way, the questions that I put out there and that Debbie asked, what are your expectations, what questions do you have, that's something that I actually do pretty much every presentation that I can. And the reason for that is because people don't show up to hear us or see us speak. The reason you're here is because of what you expect to get out of this, right? There's something that you want to get out of this, and that's why people come to presentations. So for me, when I know what that is, I have a much better chance of delivering what you want, what you need. And even sometimes, you know, when I'm doing a presentation and I ask, what are your expectations? And people will throw things out there and I think, oh, I don't know if I actually have that in the presentation. But knowing ahead of time allows me, as I'm going along, to say, by the way, back to your question, what you wanted to get out of this, this applies to that. So it at least puts it in my head so I know to refer back to something that an audience member has asked me to try and answer questions. If I'm not going to cover something that somebody has put out there, I try to mention that too, or at the end of the presentation say, you know, what's left for you? What didn't I cover that you still want to talk about? So that's one thing just right off the bat that I would encourage you to do anytime you have a presentation is check in with your audience and see what they're looking for, because it will give you a better chance of understanding what they need. So why do we use icebreakers? Here's the deal. Everybody that's a great performer has a warm-up for their audience, right? Rock stars have warm-up bands. Comedians have a warm-up act. Even talk show hosts have somebody that goes out and warms up the audience. So it's actually really important to get your audience ready for whatever it is you're about to deliver. And if you think about it, even if you go to the movies, you've got preview trailers that are there to sort of get you in the mood and in the mode of watching the movie. So warming up your audience, getting them ready to go is a really important thing to do. Only as speakers, we typically don't have a warm-up act, right? We have to do it ourselves. It's funny, I even read this morning that you should warm up your hands before greeting someone because a cold handshake can create a hostile environment. So creating warmth, whether it's physical warmth when you're giving a handshake or warming up an audience, is really important. So how do you do that? So the way I do it is through improv. I have a background in improvisation. Pretty much the way I engage is I start with improv activities, and the easiest way to do it is Google what I have up on the screen, improv warm-ups, and you will come up with all kinds of articles, videos. So someone said, you know, how do you get 5-minute, or what are some ideas for 5-minute energizers for a group of 15 to 20 people? That's what I start with, is I look for improv warm-ups. And I start watching the videos, I start reading the descriptions of the games, and I start thinking about what do I want to apply to this particular presentation. And we'll actually talk through the formula for doing that in a little bit, but that's kind of where I start. And it can be as simple as, if you want the audience to get to know each other, you know, there's a very simple name game in improv where people go around and introduce themselves saying their name with an adjective in front of it. So it might be, I'm Jolly Juliana, or I'm Judgy Juliana, depending on how I feel that day. But it could be something as simple as that. Now, more often than not, I will look up a quick, you know, 5-minute Energizer game, but then I customize it. I don't usually stop there with just the game, because the thing is, I want it to have meaning for what's going on in the room. So instead of just looking for an energizer, I look for ideas, but then I go one step further, which is, what do I want the audience to get out of this? Even if it's just a 5-minute energizer, I want them to know there's more to it. Because here's the reason. When I was a kid, I was a performer from a young age. As you can see here, I liked doing presentations. There's my little ballet recital at the kitchen table. The problem was, despite the fact that I thought I was really engaging, as you can see right here, not everyone else thought that. That person, otherwise known as my own dad, helped me realize early on that in order to really do a great performance, I have to learn how to engage and amuse my audiences. And one thing my dad taught me from a very young age is that it's not all about you, Juliana. In order to really help others, you have to know what others want or need. So in order to impress this guy, my own dad, I had to step up my game. So I look at engagement as a way of checking in with the audience to figure out what it is they really want and how they're doing and what they're looking for. So having said that, I want to check in with you right now and ask you to write in the question box, what's your go-to icebreaker? How do you typically warm up audiences? So if you have a way that you, energize or start your audiences going when you're doing a presentation, go ahead and type it in the question box. If you have a name for it, I know a lot of people use things like 2 truths and a lie, or maybe you just go around and introduce yourself and maybe answer a question. Utilize technology with websites like Kahoot. Thank you, Brian. So I think people typically tend to have their own sort of warm-ups. I have my own warm-up that's sort of my go-to, and I'll tell you what it is. My go-to icebreaker is called 3 Things in Common. Let's see, I'm getting some others here. Group juggle, give one interesting fact about yourself. Thank you, Nanette. It varies by the need of the audience. Yes, very much so. Team building workshops will use team activity. Building a tower out of noodles and marshmallows. How much fun. That's great. Thank you, Michael. So what I do typically for my go-to icebreaker is this 3 things in common game. And the reason I do this, I don't do it every time, but I do it a lot because it covers so many areas. Let's see, here's some other suggestions or things that people do. A light joke, what I'm talking about that everybody can relate to. Thank you, Dawn. An adjective icebreaker, an interesting fact, maybe some polling. A top 10 game. Break people into 4 groups. Each have 2 minutes to write down as many answer options as possible for what are the top 10 best-selling cars in America, for example. Okay, so give them a question and then have them write down the top 10. All right, great. So when I do my 3 things in common, I'm going to give you an example of this, and y'all can use this one because it applies to so many situations. The game is really simple. I give them 2 minutes to find 3 things that they have in common with a partner. Or they can do it in a triad, whatever's convenient for the situation. The reason there's 2 rules to this game, by the way. One is they can't find a commonality that's readily apparent, like they can't say we both wear glasses, and it can't be something they already know about the person, like we're both members of ATD. And I tell them that's cheating, and they think that's funny. So I play this 3 things in common game for a couple reasons. Number 1 is it certainly breaks the ice, right? It gets them connected because they start talking to each other. Number 2, they get to talk about themselves, and Harvard neuroscientists have found that talking about ourselves gives us the same signals of pleasure in our brain as food or money. So I know a lot of you have games where they're saying something about themselves. That's always a good thing to do. The thing I like about this 3 things in common game is that at the end of it, the debrief can be really useful. So I'll use this game anytime I'm doing anything on networking, team building, relationship building, communication, because it has all of those elements. So what I do is I have them find 3 things in common. I give them a couple of minutes. I stop them at the end. The key to this is the debrief. When I debrief it, I ask them questions around, what happened to the relationship with your partner? How do you feel after, as opposed to before you started finding commonalities? I also can use it as a lesson on communication, right? So I talk about what did you have to do to find 3 things in common? Well, you had to ask questions, and you had to answer, and you had to listen. Those are 3 ways to increase communication or have a better conversation with people. So the reason I'm pointing this game out is, and I think all of your games that you guys threw out there would actually do the same thing, which is break the ice, get them connected. The key is, though, can you add a little bit with the debrief? Can you find an application in the debrief that actually helps them walk away with more, with a little bit more meaning? So you're playing a top 10 game, I might debrief around what did you get out of that? What did you observe? How did that help you get connected with the people around you? Because to me, that's one of the keys to making an icebreaker effective is the debrief. So we'll talk about more about that in a minute. By the way, any questions around that before we move on? And I would say the same thing when you're looking at icebreakers, energizers, right? Energizers are great for creating energy, but what helps make them more effective is to think about what do I want them to get out of that energizer? Do I literally just want them to move around, or do I want them to somehow get connected while they're moving around? I always try to have like a dual purpose. So it's not just an energizer or a game. And I'll tell you why I do this too, is because I'm the kind of person that likes an icebreaker. That's why I do improv. That's why I engage people in my talks. But not everybody is like that. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I should have figured it out a long time ago, but I didn't until I had a daughter who's an extreme introvert. And I realized, oh, not everybody likes sharing. Not everybody wants to do these kind of games and communication. So what I learned is, how do I make these activities reach more than just the person who likes to share or just the extrovert who wants to get connected? How do I make it more meaningful for the people in the room or the introverts? And so my daughter is a great way for me to think through my activities and go, what would my daughter do here? And how would she feel comfortable playing this game or not? So here's the thing is, once you've broken the ice in a conversation, you want to keep the engagement going. And by engagement, I mean active participation. And there's all kinds of studies out there, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, about how learning is enhanced when people are engaged, right? When people are part of the conversation, they're gonna retain information more. And really, when you have engagement in your presentations, you take your presentation from being information to experience. And everybody's looking for experiential now. Everybody wants engagement, meeting planners, conferences. They want people to be engaged. And so when you put engagement in, it's kind of like taking your presentation from being, hey, look at my slideshow about my vacations, to what would it be like to experience that myself? Which, even if it's horrifying, like this woman looks like it is here, they're still having an experience. And the audience is going to get an experience out of actively participating in the conversation. It also gives you the experience of partnering with your audience. So they're part of the presentation. And that's really my go-to. I much prefer to deliver a presentation where I'm engaging and interacting. When I have to do a TED Talk or even doing these webinars, it stresses me out because I can't connect with you as well, right? I want to know what's going on in your head right now. So feel free to write in the question section what's going on for you, or what questions do you have based on some of the things I'm talking about, because I miss you guys. Like, I want to hear from you guys. I'm thinking, what are y'all doing out there? So I do that in my live presentations all the time. I check in with the audience. And one of you mentioned about how do you engage when there's a lapse in thought, right? How do you maneuver through that? That's when I usually check in with the audience. And if I have to, I'll just ask them, where are you guys now? What's going on for you now? What questions do you have? And I'll throw it out to questions a little bit and see what's going on, just to give me time to re-engage with them, but also to think about, what do I want next for them? Where do I want to take this next? The other thing I would say for that is prepare in advance for your questions, for your lapses. So a lot of times when I'm preparing my presentation, I'll have questions or concepts that I know I want to go to. So if there's a moment where I feel that, like, ooh, I'm not sure what I want to do next, I might check. I try not to use notes too much, but I'll have bullet points, or I'll have something that I've thought of in advance as a question or a concept or whatever it is that I want to go to next. Thank you, Eddie, for saying miss you too, Juliana. I appreciate that. All right. So when should you engage your audience? You know, literature says every 7 to 10 minutes. People don't have a long attention span anymore. I think even talking for 7 to 10 minutes at a time feels long to me. So I'll talk about a concept. I might tell a quick story, but I try to check in with questions periodically, even throughout. But I throw in a place of engagement anytime I want to do any of these things, right? If I'm trying to create a sense of community, if I feel like there's a disconnect in the room, if the audience has been too quiet for too long of a period of time, I try to put in a couple of questions or something that I had thought of in advance to get them talking. To create a shift in the audience. So if you see that they're starting to lose interest or lose focus, I might throw in an Energizer, icebreaker, an activity, and to change the energy in the room. And that can be anything. We're going to talk about examples of how you do these things. The other thing is to make them like you and to make a connection, because part of it is you staying connected with them and you connecting with what they want and what they want to get out of it. So checking in with your audience periodically throughout the conversation is always a good way to do that. So here are different ways you can engage, right? I'm sure a lot of you use some of these, and I would encourage you to also put that in the questions. What are your go-to ways, right? Because you can use an icebreaker, something that's like a 5 to 10 minute Energizer activity to sort of start the engagement. But other ways to engage throughout would include things like asking your audience questions, having a flip chart or a group discussion, sharing or having them share with partners in small groups, having a full audience interaction where maybe you had them stand up and do a power pose, or you have them stand up and give each other a high five, or something where they're all doing one thing together. Games and competition, I know there have been lots of things on gamification. Those are pieces of engagement you can add. Physical activities, taking deep breaths, moving around, standing up and sitting down, anything like that. Stories are ways to engage, but I always encourage people to take courses on storytelling. Yeah, stand up and talk as a group. Thanks, Brian. That's your go-to. Music, a lot of people play music or dance or do something, and I would encourage you to bring in anything that you enjoy, because part of it is letting the audience get to know you. So I've seen presentations where someone's brought in a guitar and sung a song that related. They had created a song that related to the presentation they were delivering. Doodling, you know, there's someone who's a great, I don't mean just doodling like you would doodle on a pad of paper. I mean someone who's very artistic and does those doodle pictures. You know what I'm talking about? And she will create those sometimes as she's going. That's fascinating. Doing crafts. I know someone put in here about the marshmallows and the spaghetti. I've seen presentations where people have just had pipe cleaners and cotton balls on the table or on the tables, and throughout the presentation they just encourage people to use them or play with them, or they'll have an actual activity around it. So be creative in the ways that you engage and bring in your own personality, because that's really what's going to also make it work. So let's talk for a second about icebreaker mistakes. Like, what are the things that create mistakes when you're doing icebreakers? So here's sort of like the big scary thought, right? We don't want the audience going to sleep. But here are the things that I see causing the mistakes when people try to engage. Commitment phobia. And by this I mean when we as the speaker are not committed. So I used to work with the CIO on presentation skills, and I was always and he was doing large presentations to large groups, and then even just sometimes board presentations to the board. And it was really the reason he got, oops, didn't mean to do that. The reason he got a coach is because he had gotten a lot of feedback that he was talking too much, that people weren't connecting with his message. So I was encouraging him to engage. Put some questions in there. Ask your audience what they think about it or what something means to them. But he said to me, he went and tried it, and he came back and he goes, I asked a question, but nobody answered. What do I do if nobody answers? And this is commitment phobia, which is if you ask a question, you have to be committed that you're trying to get an answer. So what he would do, because he had me kind of come and watch him, is he'd be like, well, what does anybody think about this? Anybody? Okay, well, yeah. Okay, well then, you know, and if nobody gave him an answer, it would really throw him. So here's the thing. You have to ask a question and be committed to the answer. So I was in a presentation Monday, and I asked a question, and one person gave an observation or an answer, and then I said, who else? And nobody spoke. And so I said, that's okay, I'll wait. And then I just let there be silence. Now, I wouldn't do that for a long period of time, but I would do it for 5 to 10 seconds. And the reason I do that is because if you have introverts in your group, if you're talking to a group who is maybe notoriously introverts, maybe engineers or any kind of group that tends to be more data focused and less people focused, they might need more time to actually come up with their answer. So if you are asking a question, be committed to giving the audience time to answer. And when I did that Monday, they did start talking again, but I will also gauge, like if I'm not getting a lot of engagement, I will move on. I don't necessarily just stay and beat a dead horse, but I do let them know I really want an answer, because sometimes the audience doesn't know if it's rhetorical or not, and that's part of the commitment too. Let them know, you know, what do you guys think of this? And then wait for the answer. They'll give it to you. The other thing that I see that causes mistakes with icebreakers is this let's play. Let's do something really silly and push us outside of our comfort zone. Okay, you go first, right? Like having somebody else start the conversation. You can't ask your audience to do anything that you're not willing to do first. So even if it's just an Energizer or something kind of simple, you have to give the example first. So I was doing something a few weeks ago, and I asked them to, as a group, they were doing some activities, and I said, one of the things I want you to do is share your secret dream job, what you would do if you could do anything. But I gave them an example, and my example was something kind of ridiculous but true for me, which was I'd like to be my secret dream job is to be the oracle in the Matrix, like the old lady that sits around, I shouldn't say old lady, the wise, sage lady that sits around her house and people just come to her for advice and she speaks cryptically. For some reason, I just think that would be so much fun, and I picture that's what I'm going to do in my later years. So I threw that out there as an example and then asked them to do it. And several people came back and said, I wouldn't have known what to say if you hadn't given that oracle example, or because you said that silly oracle thing, I could say mine, you know. So be prepared to go first if you're asking them to do something. I also do another activity called Yes and quite a bit, which is an improv game that has, and this is an icebreaker you might want to use, which you can Google Yes and it's just yes, comma, and improv game. And it's where you tell a story one sentence at a time. So one person starts and says, once upon a time, there was a very sleepy audience. And then the second person says, yes, and Juliana jumped up and started hitting people over the head with a wooden spoon. Yes, and. So that's the way it goes. And it teaches all kinds of things like listening, giving up control of a conversation, staying in the moment, thinking on your feet. But it's tricky for people. It's a little scary. So I always make sure to demo it, and I ask for a person to come up and play with me first and say, I'm going to do a yes and game. Who wants to try this out? And almost always there'll be someone in the audience that's willing. I usually just wait until someone volunteers or give a little bit of encouragement, and eventually someone will volunteer and come up, and we play it first before I ask them to do it on their own. So that's rule number 2, is always model what it is you're looking for. So even your games that you play earlier, like asking for an adjective or building with the crafts or asking for the top 10, I would share some of your own first to model it for the group, because people get really confronted with things like that. The other mistake I see is improvising icebreakers. So while I'm talking about these, and I'm talking a lot about improv, very rarely do I ever just throw in one that I haven't actually practiced. I will throw out questions. I will check in with the audience, but I don't usually throw in a whole icebreaker. Now, sometimes I will if it's something I've used before and I know it really works. Like I might throw in a 3 things in common midway through if the energy seems really low. I will do that. But I try not to improvise too much on the fly. And that's really another secret of making this work, is you really have to think about these things ahead of time. They might seem like they're things you're just throwing out there, even though they're energizers or 5 quick warm-ups, but you really need to practice them and think about them. It makes such a difference in the delivery. The last mistake I see is no debrief or application of it, and I'm guilty of this myself. Sometimes I'll do, so I'll give you an example. About a month ago, I was delivering to a group of professional MBA students at a university, and we were talking about career advancement and networking for your career. And at the last minute, I thought, oh, I'm going to just ask a little icebreaker question around what was the strangest thing you ever had to do for one of your jobs? And I did model it. I talked about, I have a previous career as a lawyer. I was a prosecutor, so I shared something silly that I had to do as a prosecutor, which, by the way, was prosecuting prostitution stings. It was actually really funny and interesting. But I threw that out there as my experience. And then people started talking about their experience. And midway through, I realized, oh, you know what? I did not prepare a debrief for this. So as they were talking about it, we just went straight from that into the next thing because there wasn't a lot of time to debrief. I asked a few people to share, and then I was with a co-facilitator, and we had to move right on. And what I realized is that was my mistake. I thought, you know what? That would have been so much more effective if I had asked them after, when you think about the strangest thing you have to do, what do you observe about yourself? What do you become aware of when you think about those things? What was the benefit to you of having done that strange task or job? Just asking a few questions like that can take a sort of inane icebreaker and make it meaningful to people. So always look for a minute or two to debrief or ask for application. The other debrief question I ask is the first one is sort of a creating awareness. What did you observe? What did you notice about yourself? What was the benefit of having gone through that? The second one I ask is, how does that apply to real life? Or how does that apply to you now? And that wouldn't be necessarily with the, well, maybe it would be with the strangest job. But that's a way to let people actually do the work themselves of applying it, right? You don't have to apply it yourself. You can just ask the question, how does this apply to your real life? You know, let's say they do 3 things in common. Let's say they build the noodles with the macaroni and the marshmallows. What's the application of this to your real life? That gets them thinking, and it gives them a little piece of value that they might not otherwise get. So I always have to remind myself, you know, make sure and do the application. Don't skip over it. So if you're thinking about, all right, great, yeah, let's do some icebreakers. Now, how do you do it, right? How do you create them? Because like I said, I pull some out, I look for ideas, but I usually don't stop there with what's out there. I usually customize it or go through, this is my process. This is the process I use to create my icebreakers. Number one, I start with the outcome in mind. So what's the purpose of the activity? So the quick 5-minute Energizer for the group of 15 to 20 people, the first thing I'd ask you is, what's the purpose? What do you want to do? Is it to, what's the purpose of having them energized? Is it that you want them to start talking to each other? You want them to start sharing? You just want them to be part of the conversation? Like, I'm always looking for a secondary purpose. What do you want them to get out of the actual activity? Some confidence, maybe a connection with somebody in the room. Let's see, what are the other things I'm looking for? Yeah, maybe, teaching a concept. Are you trying to teach a concept and you're using this activity to actually give them the experience? So sort of like that yes and game I was talking about. I'm always thinking, when I play that game, I try to tie it to a specific concept I'm teaching. So if it's a listening skill, you know, concept that I'm teaching, I ask them about, I make sure that the listening piece is in there, or I decide whether that's the best thing for it. So the first thing I always say is, when you're picking the icebreaker or any kind of engagement activity, ask what the outcome is that you're trying to get. The second thing is, you have to think about the audience size, the seating, the space, and the time allowed, right? So with a big audience, it's got to be something everybody can do in their chairs or together or as a partner. Is it something you want them to go around the tables and do? Is there space for them to get up and move around? How much time do you have? Sometimes it is only 5 minutes. Although I would also say, and I'm kind of just throwing this in, that I usually try to give myself about 10 minutes for an icebreaker, because it actually gives it the space it needs. You know, they're not just, so I was reading an article that said, when you call something an icebreaker, it demeans it. The icebreakers aren't just icebreakers. They're not just something you throw away. And so as not to offend anybody who, you know, is offended by the term icebreaker, I think it's fine to call it an icebreaker, but I do think we want to look at it as more than just an icebreaker. It's actually something that's meaningful. So I don't ever think of my little questions or activities as just icebreakers. I always look for them as meaningful ways to get the audience engaged. The third step is create clear instructions. And the simplest way to let the audience know how to do it. And that includes things like how to start. You know, sometimes I'll tell them, person with the longest hair, shortest hair goes first. Like, the more specific you can be, the more helpful it is. I also tell them how I'm going to stop them, because sometimes they get, you know, they'll get loud when they're doing the icebreaker, and you want to let them know that ahead of time so you're not yelling over them. So think through kind of how you're going to run the icebreaker. And then, of course, preparing the debrief and application questions, which I talked about earlier, and then practicing it ahead of time is really important. And if you can, like, I practice ahead of time a lot of times. Like I said, if I'm trying to think about how my daughter would participate in it, I'll ask her. Or my husband, he's always my guinea pig. I'll run it by him and I'll say, if I were to ask you this, how would you respond? So you could even just practice with another person or practice it in low stakes settings, right? So if you have a place where you can speak for free, or if you have a little group and you want to practice it, that's a great way to see whether your icebreaker is going to work or not. And really,
Juliana?
Yes.
There is somebody on the line who did a great icebreaker last week at our tech conference. And if you want to just take a moment to take a breath, I would love to unmute Adam and have him share that, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely, yes.
So Adam, would you share with us, looking at this icebreaker formula, the icebreaker that you did at the tech conference last week? Because we just think it was wonderful.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot for allowing me to share. So starting with the outcome in mind, we were looking for a way to re-energize people coming out of a large lunch setting. They had just spent an hour eating lunch and networking, and so we wanted a way to get everybody excited, up and moving around, to re-energize them for the afternoon discussions. And so in considering the following, we looked at the audience size, the room, space, and time allowances. We had about 15 minutes to do this activity, and what we did was we had about 100, 120 people in the room. We divided the group in half, and we played rock, paper, scissors. Everyone knows the game rock, paper, scissors. And so the way that I launched it was I played a 2-minute video. It was a fun video we found off of YouTube that talks about the history of rock, paper, scissors, how to play it, and the game. So it gets everybody thinking about the direction and what we're going to be doing for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Then people got some laughs, and they watched the video. Then I stood up, gave the rules of how we were going to play, because different people play different ways. But gave the instructions. And within a matter of less than 7 minutes, we were able to divide the groups, explain the rules, get people started, and then they took over. It was done naturally. People played rock, paper, scissors against each other. If they lost, then they moved on and cheered on the next person. If they won, that person moved on to the next person in the room and challenged the next person. And through a process of elimination, we had a winner on the left and a winner on the right. We brought those two winners up on stage, and they did a face-off, rock, paper, scissors, best 2 out of 3. And we ended up with a top winner and a runner-up, and they were each given prizes. And we received a lot of really good feedback about using that game to re-energize the group, re-engage everyone, and then get it to kick off for the next session.
I love that. I love that. That is great. That is awesome. And I know the video you're talking about. Is it the video that shows the actual game being played?
Yeah, it's a video that has a guy who claims to be a guru of rock, paper, scissors tournaments, and he's making kind of jokes about how the game originated way back when with cavemen, and then he goes through and he's doing some bits on the street with people. He's talking about statistics about how women usually start off with either scissors or paper first. They very rarely go with rock as their first throw. So it's funny little bits in there about the game, and then throughout that video it shows you the proper way to play and the proper way to throw out the hand gestures for rock, paper, scissors.
That's great. I actually read an article this morning that said if you want to beat someone at rock, paper, scissors, ask them a random question right before you play, and it confuses them so they're more likely to just throw out scissors. I don't know if that actually works, but I thought that was funny and that you brought it up. That's great. Thank you, Adam. That's awesome. And actually, I think that's a great one for large groups. I think it's hard to find large group icebreakers that everyone will play, but I think the great thing about the rock, paper, scissors is it's low stakes. Like, it's not asking them to do something as vulnerable maybe as some of the other things that I tend to do. So that's a really good one to just get people energized and moving around and having fun. Yeah, thank you for sharing. So that's great, because the next thing I wanted to do was actually go into some scenarios and get some engagement from you all about what you might do is with different scenarios that you might have. So these are some scenarios that I've had in my past and tried to come up with icebreakers. And but I'd love for you guys to chime in here and put in the answer. Oh, hold on. I have something here. Brian says a fun one with a small group is draw a pig. I don't think I've ever played draw a pig. But we can Google it. It looks like he's got a thing here on that. So that would be one that I will definitely be Googling later, draw a pig icebreaker. So here's the scenario we have, which is let's say you've got an association meeting. Oops, sorry, gave you the answer. With a speaker who is talking about using technology for presentations. And you have 25 plus attendees, and they're all seated at tables. So this is actually similar maybe to what Adam was just describing. And the purpose, though, of this icebreaker is this is at the beginning of the meeting, and you're trying to get the audience connected a little bit and help them get to know each other better. And you've got 5 to 15 minutes. So this is one where I think you could definitely do the rock, paper, scissors one here if there's space for people to move around the room, which in that little picture there might be. But there's other games you could play as well. So just having thrown that out there, I'm wondering, does anybody have any ideas that they might do for that kind of thing, an association meeting? The reason I put association meetings in here too is because, so for several years I've been in several different associations, and one of the things that I do at a lot of associations and any of the ones where I'm involved on a committee or on a board, is I do the icebreakers for the meeting. So if any of you, of course you're all in ATD, or not all of you are in it, but some of you are on the board, I encourage you to start your meetings with icebreakers, because what we found is at our ICF Houston coaches is that it helps people, it helps the guests to feel a sense of belonging, number one, if they start interacting, and it helps people to get to know each other better, and it actually serves to help our membership increase when we have some kind of facilitated icebreaker that allows people to get to know each other. So for this particular one, the association, Eddie says umu.com is what I like using in the scenario. I'm not sure what that is. What is umu? You'll have to let me know what that is. I'll share with you what I actually did in this particular situation. Is I had people at the table share what kind of phone you have and why you have that kind of phone. Something pretty simple. It was actually pretty short. We didn't have a lot of time for it. And what that did is it illuminated, it told something about you. So, you know, pretty much almost everyone has a smartphone now, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't have a smartphone or don't have the newest version. Even if they have a smartphone, you know, some people, I still have an iPhone 5S, whereas a lot of other people have it. So it allows you to talk about, are you an early adopter, are you a late adopter, how do you operate in the technology space? The second part of that, if you have time, would be something like share a picture from your phone that is meaningful to you with your table, because again, that allows people, and that one, people just went nuts. They didn't want to stop talking because almost everyone has a picture, and once they start talking about it, it tells you a lot about a person. So again, it's that sort of, the purpose was for us to help them really get to know each other, but attach it to technology. And so that's kind of how those came up. And those are really easy ones that you could use now anytime if you want and it doesn't have to be a conversation that's related or a presentation that's related to technology, but it works well with that and also if you can debrief it, sort of what does this tell you about yourself and your relationship with technology, or what did you learn about the person next to you. That would be another great way to debrief this one and actually create application with it. So any other, and if you have questions about this or comments on this, I'd love to, yeah, share them in the question screen. So let me go on to the next icebreaker. Oh, Debbie, were you going to say something?
Yes, somebody put something in the chat box about finding somebody with a birthday the same month of you. People move around, ask each other. When they find someone, they normally stand there and talk and network. And then after 2 or 3 minutes, the presenter asks another question, like find someone born in the same city as you, and then have them move around and have them ask 3 to 5 questions over a 10 to 15 minute period so that you're creating some movement and interaction.
Right, right. Yeah, I like that idea too. That's a great idea. Awesome. Thank you for that. So icebreaker scenario number 2 might be, let's say you have a full day workshop on something. This one happened to be on branding yourself for career advancement. And you've got a large like stadium seated. They're all sitting in chairs, no tables. And your goal is to, this would be like to teach a concept, which in this particular case, it was helping the audience understand how to be comfortable promoting or marketing themselves. So my goal here was, I want them to be able to talk about themselves, right, for branding purposes. How would you talk about yourself? But I wanted them to find a way to do it that was more comfortable than just saying, oh, I'm a great problem solver, or this is, something that I've done for years and I'm really good at it. In a way that makes people uncomfortable. So my goal here was, how can I get them to talk about themselves in a way that's a little bit more comfortable, but that still has a purpose of promoting or marketing or helping them see how others view them. And so what we did here was, and this is something I do all the time, by the way, I have people share an accomplishment or a career highlight from their past. So share something that you're proud of with a partner, or they can do it in 3s. And then what I do, like the follow-up to this, is that after they share the accomplishment with their partner, I might ask them, share what you accomplished and why it was meaningful to you, or sometimes I'll just ask them to share what they accomplished. But then what I do is I ask the partner to, number 1, get permission, and then number 2, share with the large group what they learned about the person after hearing their accomplishment. So for instance, we've had someone say, when I said share an accomplishment, someone shared, I created and streamlined a process for invoicing for a small business. And I worked myself out of a job, but I didn't mind that I worked myself out of a job because it really made a difference for the company. That's what they shared. The partner stood up and said, wow, so-and-so just shared that she created this system for the small business, and it really impressed me. And then I asked the question, what did you learn about this person? And she says, I learned that she's got a wonderful attitude about life, and she's graceful with rejection, and she cares about really helping people and making a difference. And so that, people are sharing their positive perception of what the person shared with them. So it has a dual purpose, right? It allows you to share an accomplishment and something that's meaningful to you, and maybe understand a little better what is meaningful to you because you're able to talk about it out loud. And number 2, it gives you an understanding of how people interpret what you say. And it builds confidence, so it makes them feel good. So I use that one a lot anytime I need to build confidence, help people understand what talking about, how it helps to talk about something you've done, how others perceive you. The second scenario is pretty similar. It's just talking about a topic that you're passionate about, although some people are like this is one that I ran by my husband, and he laughed, like, oh, I got to talk about something I'm passionate about, right? He didn't. So I said, well, what would be something you would talk about if I said intensely curious? And he said, yeah, I would do that. So I now say, talk for a minute about something you're passionate about or intensely curious about. And again, then I have the partner share, if they get permission to share. Because usually my goal is, number 1, helping them get connected, but number 2, helping them build confidence or helping them understand how they're being perceived when they're talking about X or Y. So hopefully that gives you insight into, how I'm creating activities for these particular things. And again, feel free to share in the chat if you have a comment about it. or an idea or something else that you might do. But my idea is always to kind of try to go beyond just the initial purpose, right? How can I help them get more? That's what I'm always thinking about when I'm doing these. So the third scenario is, let's say you have a full day retreat for a large organization, IT department, and you've got 25 to 35 people and they're all seated at tables. And the purpose, this is something I was asked to do at a retreat for an IT department, and I was asked to, I had 30 minutes, but it was just really rough. It was sort of like, yeah, create some team building. We'll help them get to know each other better. Now, mind you, they already knew each other pretty well. So I was trying to think of ways that they could help to get to know each other. And I'm sure a lot of you have ideas for this and have done it, especially if you've done team building. So for me, what I did here is, and this is something I do a lot, and you can kind of morph this yourself if you wanted to use this, is one activity I've done in the past is I have each table find 3 to 5 things that everyone at the table has in common. So if they kind of already know each other, this might go a little deeper, and it causes them to stretch a little bit, and they get silly with it, right? Like I've had people say, we all have cursed each other out in a foreign language, you know, or crazy stuff like that, or we've all, you know, broken our leg, our, you know, femur before, or something like that. So it's just kind of a way for people to go a little bit further and getting to know each other, and it just causes them to talk and investigate a lot. And that's kind of a simple, easy one. The other one is when I am trying to get people for team building is I'll have each table, you know, or just have them break into groups, but if they're at tables, it's easy. And I'll give the table a series of tasks, right? So they go, but I give them a series of tasks, not just one task. And I have them go around and answer a question about themselves. So I mentioned earlier, one of the questions I had them answer was, you know, what's a secret dream you have? But it might be a question related to whatever the topic is. But then I ask them to go a little further, and I'll ask them to create a name for your group and create a secret handshake or gesture. So I do this sometimes when I'm doing team building for organizations that are trying to create unity among departments, and we have people who don't know each other very well sitting at the table. So you're trying to, you know, help them get to know each other, but in order to make it lasting, we throw in this like secret handshake. So you create a gesture or handshake for your table, and then you encourage them that whenever they see that other person on the campus or on the somewhere in the organization, they do that secret gesture with each other, right? And you can kind of make it fun, tell them don't leave your buddy hanging. If someone makes a gesture at you, your obligation is to do it back. But it's a way to take what they've done in that room and continue it on out. So and there's also a large group, kind of back to what Adam was doing with the rock, paper, scissors. There's also a large group icebreaker, and if you look up large audience icebreaker, secret handshake, which is similar to this, where you can have an entire group go around, and in 1 minute, they have to create secret handshakes with each individual around them. So, and that way when they see that person again, they've got a secret handshake. So that might be something you would do at a conference that would allow people to get to know a few people at a conference, so that as they move through the days of the conference, when they see that person, they've got a secret handshake gesture. I mean, it could just be a high five or a, you know, hitting of the fists and blowing it out, whatever they want to do. But it also gives them something to take out of the room and keep the connection going with people there. So I like to use those kind of tasks that people can take away with them, or the name for the group also. They can take that out and continue it to continue the connection with people they're getting to know. Let's go to the last scenario, which is a half-day board retreat with corporate executives, and you're sitting around a conference table and they want you to help them do values or create a mission and vision statement. This one's pretty simple. What I did anyway was pretty simple. I had these people just write down their top 5 values, break them into pairs to see where the commonalities are. Or I have them each share a meaningful experience in their career and then answer the questions, what made it meaningful to you? Because beyond just trying to have everybody, you know, because the obvious thing is have everybody write down values that they think the organization should have. But again, I like to go back to letting people bring themselves to the conversation, because it really does make them feel part of the process and the equation. So I always try to, even if we're creating a group task, I always try to make sure that everybody brings themselves to it, or that with any energizer or activity or icebreaker, people are getting in about themselves, because no matter what, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, most people, you know, if they get something meaningful for themselves, if they get a piece of awareness for themselves, personal awareness, if they get some kind of, and this goes back to really my training and coaching, that anytime you ask a question that creates awareness for people, it creates a shift. And so you're giving them value beyond what they asked for even, right? So what I have found is that asking questions that allow people to get their own little nugget of personal development, their own awareness, whether it's connecting with another person or just sort of noticing how they behaved in a moment or how they interacted. People like that. And that's what tends to work with icebreakers. So what I would, well, I'm going to ask you now if you have any questions around it as well. So please, if you have some questions that are left unanswered, please put them in the question box, or comments or observations that you have. And maybe you're thinking like, I do all of this, I do all of that, you know, and you have something to add to this. I would be happy to hear it and hear what else you do. But I will say the thing I am always trying to think of is that quote that Maya Angelou says, that, you know, people will forget what you say, they'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And so my goal is, how can I make people walk away feeling like they've gotten something out of this? How can I make people, or not make people, but how can I give them the opportunity to get more value out of this presentation than just information, so that they walk away either knowing someone that they didn't know before, or learning something about themselves that they didn't know before, or, you know, getting an idea, understanding a concept, even just having an experience that they wouldn't have had before. Those are all the things that I'm thinking about when I am doing these kind of presentations and trying to create engagement. Okay, I've got a question about a good resource, a book or a website. So I have read all the books on that are, let's see, I'm trying to look behind me at my bookshelf right now. I read a lot of books on improv. So there's a book called Improvise This, which has some ideas in it. There's a book called Let's Play that, but anything that you, but you know what, honestly, I just Google everything. I do a lot of my research online, and like I said at the very beginning, I would Google improv warm-ups, improv games, because there's actually a whole group of people doing what we call applied improvisation, which is taking improv and applying it, kind of what I'm doing here. And so that's where a lot of my work comes from, is from improv. So I would say the Improvise This book or Let's Play, and I'm not sure sorry, I don't have the authors of those right away, but those are things that might help you. The other thing I can recommend as a resource is that if I'm actually creating a mastermind group for speakers who want to create more engagement in their presentations, because you kind of need a group to work with to be able to do this. And so if you go to my website, you'll see there's a button at the top of the page. My website is just julianaashley.com. I've got a mastermind group there, and it just says sign up for this mastermind group. But what it is we brainstorm ideas, we create icebreakers and activities, but we actually practice and run through them and get feedback on them. And so we keep the group small so that everybody gets a chance to run through their own presentation. So if you're interested in that, just visit my website. Debbie will be sending out an email, I think, after this, and it will have some more information as well in it for you. But thank you all so much for participating and for helping me in this presentation. That was really great that you all participated. I appreciate it so much. And Debbie, I think it is just about one minute before 1, so I'm going to turn it back over to you so that we finish on time.
Thank you so much, Juliana. We really enjoyed your presentation, and I hope all of you that are here go out to the tdhouston.org website to look for the next event that we've got coming up. We have a lot of things happening in the month of May and also in June. So go out and check the website. There are webinars, there are general meetings, CTN meetings, workshops, a lot of different things that can benefit you in your professional development. So everyone, have a great day. Thank you for coming to the webinar.